Welcome to this online lesson asking the question, what did medieval people believe caused illness? Our aims today are to know some natural and supernatural ideas about disease from medieval times, and to explain the impact of religion on medical ideas. Here's a do now task, applying some ancient thinking. This source is a late medieval urine chart. Describe what you can see in the source. How might this link in with ancient ideas? If you've not yet investigated ancient ideas, you might want to go back and try one of the earlier lessons. Also, is this a common sense or a supernatural approach to medicine? Explain what you think. Okay, pause the video here and attempt those tasks, and then we'll have a look at some suggested answers. Done? Well, here are some of the things that you might have indicated. Firstly, we can see here a doctor is inspecting a bottle of urine with a patient. Different coloured urine samples are shown around the outside. Presumably that writing that even I can't really read is indicating the nature of the urine samples and what they might indicate. Secondly, this is linked to the theory of the four humours. The balance of humours was thought to influence the urine colour perhaps. Also, common sense. It could be helpful, but it is still based on a false idea. After all, a common sense idea like this is something that doctors still use, only in a far more analytical and scientific way. If you want to improve any of your answers, then do so now. If not, we'll move on. So let's follow that up. Again, if you've not looked at the ancient ideas that existed in medieval medicine, go back and do that first. But if you have, urine charts. Medieval physicians or doctors used urine charts to check the colour, thickness, smell and even the taste of people's urine to check for illness. They linked it to the four humours. For example, very pale urine meant that there might be too much phlegm in that person's body and that needed to be rebalanced. However, there are significant limitations to this. They had no idea that they were wrong, and no one at this time really knew what caused the majority of disease. It was only the rich who could afford to use physicians, and they were the ones who were using the four humours. The thing is, when we're considering medieval ideas of what caused disease, we need to consider how accessible the different things were, and also where these ideas came from. As a task then, record the potential uses and limitations of using urine charts, which are in common use with doctors at this time. Secondly, in your view, do these represent progress or regress in medicine? Remember that progress means things getting better, regress means things kind of being held back or getting worse. Pause the video here and explain those answers. Okay, hopefully we've noted down some potential uses and limitations of the urine charts. But what about progress versus regress? Well, in some respects, this is regress in the sense that it is harking back to a very ancient idea, but it is at least applying it in a slightly new way, and that might be considered progress. Remember that urine is still used to diagnose patients even today, only with much more modern techniques. So this is perhaps a more scientific and rational approach to medicine than simply telling people to pray their disease away. So why were Hippocrates and Galen so important? Hippocrates and Galen's ideas were the basis of a medieval physician's training. The church supported their theories. They educated doctors using Galen. They owned the libraries that held the books which had all of these people's work in it. And if you challenged Galen, you were challenging God, or at least that was the view of the church. Doctors believed the four humours theory as it was rational. They saw proof when they saw that someone was sick. To the bottom right of this picture, we can actually see a medieval document describing the physical characteristics of people who are choleric or sanguine, or displaying other features of having their humours out of balance. If you've ever had a cold, you've probably had a runny nose. This was seen as fairly obvious evidence that someone had too much phlegm in their body and they were trying to get rid of it. I won't go over exactly what might be leaking out of you if you have an excess of black bile. Galen and Hippocrates were seen to have all of the answers at this time. Some follow-up tasks. Explain the importance of Hippocrates and Galen to medieval medicine. Then secondly, how does this show that the church was holding medical knowledge back? Okay, pause the video here and answer those questions. What what did we think then? Clearly we can see that Galen and Hippocrates' ideas are incredibly important if they have formed the basis of medical training during the Middle Ages. But does this show that the church is holding medicine back? Well, probably. If people were too scared to challenge Galen and Hippocrates' ideas, or were given such confidence in their ideas that they didn't feel a need to challenge them, then people weren't going to be looking out for new ideas and improving on them, and especially trying to correct the many mistakes that Galen and Hippocrates made in their work. So what about other ideas? As well as the natural and rational ideas of Hippocrates and Galen, many people believed in supernatural ideas, and this is a crucial difference or regress between the ancient times and the medieval times. Now let's not pretend that people didn't believe in the gods back in ancient times, they absolutely did. But Hippocrates and Galen were pretty clear. They said that disease had a natural cause and therefore natural treatments were what was needed. So supernatural ideas are far more important in the Middle Ages than they were perhaps in the ancient times, and that can be viewed as being more backward or an example of regress in medicine. Supernatural ideas refers to anything that cannot be given an ordinary explanation. Think about it. Super means beyond or above, and natural. It is beyond or above or aside from the natural. So the influence of religion on medieval medical thinking should be considered at this time. Religion can be considered a supernatural explanation for disease. That's not a criticism of religion, but it is an important way of considering how the medieval mind worked when it was looking for the solutions to illness. This diagram can help us understand the basic influence of the church on medieval medicine. Firstly, the church was powerful. They owned large areas of land and had a priest in every village. They dominated people's lives. It's not really a case of people either believing in God back then or not. It was just that God was taken as a fact. Everything was as it was because of God. This wasn't really even questioned. People believed in everything in the Bible, especially that God caused disease. You would go to hell if you disagreed, which was a real fear. Also, this meant that if you became ill, it might be blamed on your sins and be seen as one of God's mysterious emotions to make you a better person, or perhaps to punish you, or if you couldn't understand it at all, God moves in mysterious ways. The church also said that Galen was right, and because they control education, doctors were taught this as well. That led to all views on medicine being influenced by the church. So here we can see the kind of process beyond here. They dominate life. They provide an explanation for disease, they hark back to the old ideas, and overall that means that they have an influence on medicine. Your task now is to draw down a cross of your own to help you remind you that this is all about religion and in particular Christianity in Europe, and write down your own notes around it to show the kind of influence that the church had on medicine. You can pause the video here while you complete that task. Done? Well, let's look in more detail at religious and supernatural theories of disease. On a piece of paper or on your computer, create a diagram like this. There is a reason why it looks like this. It shows different sections that we're going to be working on. The heading it should carry is Medieval Causes of Disease, Supernatural, Religious and Miasma. If you don't know what miasma is, you soon will. So pause the video while you complete this task, and I do recommend that you use a pair of compasses and a ruler to complete this, and if you're at all nervous about the drawings, do use a pencil as well. Let's make use of those diagrams. Later in this lesson you will see information pages on other causes of illness that were believed by medieval people. Religion, which we've touched upon already, supernatural ideas which go beyond religion, and the theory of miasma, which really means the theory that bad air or smells can cause disease. Firstly, label each of the outer sections, those are the triangular bits outside of the circle, with each of those headings. So label one religion, one supernatural, and one miasma or bad air. Then you're going to study each information page as it appears and create detailed notes on the outer sections of the diagram outside of the circle. But what about inside the circle? Well, here you're going to do something called dual coding. In the middle sections, draw some basic pictures or a picture to represent that particular cause. Dual coding works by forcing you to think more deeply about it and also it provides a visual clue even in the mind for when you're trying to recall these things later on, so it can help encode this information into your long-term memory. If you need to add the headings to those outer sections, then pause the video and do that now. If not, we'll move on to information page number 1. But also, don't forget about this guy. Okay, he's meant to represent a virus or a piece of bacteria. I think with those little spikes coming off the outside, he's more likely to be a virus. Today, we may take for granted that disease is caused by invisible things like viruses and bacteria. However, medieval people could not see or study microorganisms and microbes. They could only base their ideas on what they could see, what they felt that they knew, and certainly what they believed. Faith was an incredibly important part of medieval medicine. So if you're unclear about that at all, maybe make some notes now before we move on to the religion page. Religious ideas. Everyone was religious in the Middle Ages. The church was a core part of life. People feared God and the power of the church. The Bible taught that God controlled all aspects of life, both good and bad. They used God to explain bad harvests and the death of animals, so believing God sent disease was obvious. Also, that God could cure you of disease if you got it. People believed diseases were a punishment from God for their sins, or God testing their faith. The prior of Christchurch Abbey in 1348 said, God used suffering to drive out the numberless sins of the people. You might recognise the significance of that date. That is the date that the Black Death ravaged England. Okay, pause the video here and make some detailed notes on your diagram under the religious section. Press play when you're ready to have a look at the next section. Next section, supernatural ideas. Many people in the Middle Ages were superstitious. They believed in the supernatural like witchcraft, luck and astrology. Minority groups such as Jews were blamed for poisoning whales. Obviously this was nonsense and just an early example of anti-Semitism, but these were deeply held beliefs by people at the time. Physicians believed the alignment of stars and planets could affect your health and cause disease. Before you scoff at that too much, think about the number of people who still read their horoscope even today. And in the 14th century, astrology was a key part of medical training, and physicians used planetary movements and zodiac signs in their treatment. Today we tend to separate science from superstition really quite starkly, so you can't really mix the two. In medieval times, their understanding was such that really they were seen as being more parts of the same overall idea, the same way that people tried to understand the world around them. And lacking any better explanations, this seemed like a pretty natural solution. Anyway, pause the video here, make some detailed notes and draw your little pictures on your diagrams. Press play when you're ready to have a look at the third section. Miasma or bad air. Sometimes this is pronounced as miasma, but I've always said miasma, so I'm going to stick with that. People blamed bad stinking air called miasma for causing diseases like Black Death. People believed bad or poisoned air made them ill. It seemed logical, as dirty places smelt bad, and that's often where disease was. But notice that they didn't necessarily think that the dirt itself was what was causing the disease. It was the air coming off of it. Indeed, some very filthy places like sewers were actually believed to be safe from miasma, as the foul stench from the sewer would overpower the poisoned miasma. King Edward III said, "The filth from the houses is infecting the air with contagious sickness." He would have believed this very deeply. He'd even lost his favourite daughter to the Black Death. They linked it to God as well, saying that he caused the poisonous air to cleanse people of their sins. Others even linked it to things like earthquakes, opening up great cracks in the ground which would release bad air into the skies and cause illness. This was a really important idea. People had no understanding of the germs that really cause bad smells and actually the germs that cause disease. You can look at miasma as being a rational idea that is very close to being correct, because bad smells are often associated with the dirt that causes disease, but it isn't correct. And in fact, this was really misleading. For centuries afterwards, people would be looking to combat the air and the smells in the air rather than the root cause of that bad air. And that meant that they were often barking up the wrong tree when it came to preventing disease. Anyway, Pause the video here and add some detailed notes to your section on miasma or bad air. Some final additions. What explanation of illness do the following relate to? You're going to see a series of statements. After I've read each one, you can pause the video and add it to the correct section of your diagram. Illness is sent by God as a punishment for the sins of the people. One example of this was the Black Death. As a result of people being bad, God sends a disease to kill off the bad and some good so that everyone learns their lesson. Which section does that go in? The devil's helpers shoot invisible arrows at people to cause them to become ill. These invisible arrows are called elf shot. These cause illnesses such as headaches. In fact, we still have a hangover of this in our modern language. If someone suffers a stroke, which we now understand to be the brain having a problem, this is not something that people in the Middle Ages would have been able to understand, so that they believe that instead they had been struck by an elf's arrow. I like to think of medieval people finding the stone arrowheads of prehistory in the ground and wondering where on earth they came from, and perhaps supposing that they came from the elves. Anyway, which section does that go in? An outbreak of plague in 1361 killed so many children, another churchman said God was punishing children who didn't respect or love their parents. Which section does that go in? People have gotten ill in the town because of the four humours being unbalanced by noxious air. Which section will you put that in? Witches were blamed for all illnesses because they had put a curse on a group of people. And the alignment of the planets in the sky was believed to cause illness if it was unfavourable. Okay, pause the video while you complete your notes on that, and then we'll have a look at some answers. If you need to make any corrections, you can do so then. Let's take them one by one. The first one is religious. It's quite clearly saying that God, the Christian God, has caused the disease, in this case the Black Death. The next you might have linked to religion because it mentions the devil, but a more accurate one is that this is supernatural. The four humours one is actually about the miasma theory or bad air. It's a rational or natural explanation. The one about God punishing the children, that's religious and supernatural. Witches, supernatural. And the alignment of the planets, supernatural. Hopefully you can see from here that the predominant theories tended to be religious, supernatural, or a mixture of the two. People's old ideas took a long time to shake. Let's summarise this with an exam-style question. In the Edexcel specification, this is a 12-mark answer, which is asking you to analyse a particular issue and explain it using your knowledge. There are 6 marks for your knowledge here, so make sure that you include enough, and there are 6 marks for your analysis, so read the question carefully and understand what is being asked of you. Explain the theories medieval people had for what caused disease. Now here, it's not just describing what people believed, it's explaining why they believed that. That's a really crucial distinction. If you don't explain why people believe what they did, you're not going to pick up those marks for the explanation, sometimes referred to as Assessment Objective 2 or AO2. However, in the Edexcel exam, you are given a little bit of help. You may use the following in your answer: religious ideas and the theory of miasma. However, you can't get all of the knowledge marks if that's all you mention. You must also use information of your own. If you're already familiar with this style of question and you're happy with your technique, you can pause the video here and attempt the answer. You'll want to spend around about 18 to 20 minutes on writing it, so make sure you write enough. If you're unfamiliar with this though, here's some tips on how you might answer. You want to use what I call 3 PEAL paragraphs. PEAL stands for point, example, explain and link. Here's how it might look. You can use this writing frame if you find it helpful. If not, write it in your own style. Firstly, make a point. One medieval theory about what caused disease was, then say. Then give an example. A specific example of this theory was. Explain it, the effect of this was, or this involved. And then you link it back to the question. Medieval people believed this theory because. And it's that linking sentence that's crucially important here and is going to pick up the majority of your AO2 or explanation marks. So you must include it. And no, you don't need to include the headings point, example, explain and link. It'll make you look like a real amateur. So once you've included 3 point, example, explain, link paragraphs like that, you're not quite done. You need to then conclude what was the most important medieval theory overall, or what was the overall trend of medieval belief about medicine and the cause of disease. Okay, if you want to keep all this advice up on the screen, I suggest that you pause the video now and give yourself between 18 and 20 minutes to write this question, longer if you're entitled to that in the exam. Good luck, and off you go. How's that? Hand aching now? Probably is. Well, let's see if we can improve our answers even further. Here's one I made earlier. For this write-up, I'm going to colour code where I've used point, example, explain and link so you can see how I've broken down the different aspects of my answer. Really though, it's the link sentences that most often get missed out of this when I'm marking people's work. And you don't have to write it as a link sentence in the same way that I have here, but you do need to make sure that throughout your answer you are linking it back to explaining why medieval people believed what they did. Here's my first example. One medieval theory of what caused disease were religious ideas. For example, virtually all medieval people believed in God and God's ability to cause sickness and cure it. The effect of this was that people were likely to pray in order to be cured, or to pray alongside trying other remedies. Medieval people believed in this theory because they had few other ideas as to what really caused disease, and because religion was so central to everybody's life. Okay, so I've included some relevant knowledge there. It's based upon this first stimulus point about religious ideas, and I've linked it back and explained why so many people believed it at the time. Let's try another. Another theory of what caused disease was the theory of miasma. This theory involved the belief that bad air or smells caused illness. This meant that preventative measures often focused on removing bad smells or replacing bad air with stronger smells. Medieval people believed in this theory because they used common sense to recognise that filthy and unclean conditions were often associated with bad smells and illness. They had no knowledge of germs and so based their ideas on what they could experience instead. Notice how much of that paragraph is taken up with linking it back to the question. But so far I've used religious ideas and miasma, which I was given within the question. I'm not going to pick up all the knowledge marks unless I include something of my own. So let's go. Finally, medieval people believed in supernatural theories of disease. For example, even doctors believed that the position of the planets in the sky could influence outbreaks of illness. The effect of this was that doctors were also astrologers, and supernatural ideas often combined with more rational and natural explanations. Medieval people believed in this as they didn't understand what the planets actually are, and they were unaware that the motion of the planets was just a coincidence and not a cause of disease. I guess what I mean by that is that if they noticed the position of the planets and something bad happened, they would assume that correlation was causation, and that's not really the case, is it? Finally then, my conclusion. The overall trend of belief was religious. The church had tremendous power over all aspects of medieval life. This meant that most people followed the religious and supernatural ideas that the church put forward. Even doctors were educated by the church, and so even more rational and common sense theories tended to be learned and believed because the church allowed it. You could have easily gone for a conclusion that focused on the most important aspect of medieval belief here, and you may well have gone with the religious ideas one for that one there, I'm not sure. Anyway, you can pause the video here and review my answer, and if you haven't got it full screen, you probably want to make it full screen in order to do that. Once you've improved your answer to your satisfaction, that's the end of the lesson. I'll say thank you very much for watching. I hope it has been useful. Best of luck with the rest of your studies, and good health!